Hi, my name is Emily Phillips, and welcome to this episode of Step to Stories. In Step to Stories, we step and move while we listen to something inspiring or fascinating, maybe true crime, maybe addiction, all kinds of interesting stories. But today, we're going to talk about something that is so fascinating. I promise you, you're going to get so many steps in, and you're not even going to realize it because you're going to be so engrossed in this story. Today, I'm going to be talking to my friend Brad Ewell. Brad is a gentleman that found out at around age 47, 48 that he was indeed adopted. All of his life, he believed his parents were his biological parents. And one day, as he will share with you, he finds out that his life was a lie. And not only did he find this out, but he found out where his biological parents were and his new family was. And when you hear the details about this, it is going to blow your mind. This is not a typical I just found my parents' adoption story. This has so many twists and turns. I mean, we're talking some true crime, we're talking prison, we're talking like getting out of prison. Like it's gonna blow your mind. And I'm super interested to see what you think about the outcome in this story. There's going to be a lot of people that are going to be on different teams with it, and I want to know kind of what you think about it. So make sure you put it in the comments. This is a long story, so we've broken it up in a few episodes. So if you haven't watched the first episode, stop this now and go and watch it so that you can really get caught up and with the story, because it truly is fascinating. And even though he didn't meet his dad till 48 years later, it was very incredible the way that it helped Brad, but the way that it also helped his dad really get some closure and be able to start a new chapter. So I'm super excited about it. If you are adopted or just found out you were adopted, I really think that this guy can really inspire you, and he's happy to connect with you if you want to put your information in the comments. He's really good at counseling with people that have just found out they were adopted or have always been adopted and have struggled with some issues with that. So with that, grab your watches, let's get stepping, and let's learn about Brad and his amazing adoption story. But I'm just super excited to have you here, Brad. How are you?
I'm doing good.
Good. I really appreciate having you here today. So Brad, your wife, Pam, I had posted on social media that I was looking for extraordinary, fascinating stories that people would want to listen to and get their steps in while listening to it, and it would make an impact. And your wife messaged me, and she was like, "You have to hear my husband's story. It is so amazing, and you'll never hear another story like it." And I will say, when I read this summary, I was blown away. I sent it to our team, and we were all like, they all immediately said, "That's a story I would step to." And one person said, "I'm going to be so engrossed in that story, I may not even be stepping. I may just sit and watch." But let's go back to the beginning. So tell us a little bit about you. Where did you grow up? Tell us a little bit about your family. Start there before we get into the roller coaster of events. And I'm going to get stepping, so go ahead and grab your watches, those of you watching, and we're going to get rolling.
So I grew up in Plano, which for people not from Texas is just a little bit north of Dallas. That's where I spent, most of my childhood. I was actually, shortly after I was born, I spent a little time in Chicago. Then my parents brought me back here to Dallas, and we lived in Dallas, Richardson, and then eventually Plano.
Whereabouts in Plano? My husband...
Pretty close to where your husband grew up, because my wife and your husband went to high school together.
Oh, there you go.
That's how she knows all of y'all is.
You know what? My husband's here. At some point, we may pause. I'll bring him down to meet you. But go ahead.
Oh, cool. So they grew up together. So I grew up in Plano. I would say a pretty normal childhood. Everything was good. I had good parents. We had a good time. Like anybody, and I have 3 kids now, and I tell my kids this: at some point, if you end up in therapy, you'll be talking about me in therapy. So I recognize that's just kind of a parent thing, as we all don't get it perfect. But it, for the most part, seemed like a normal childhood. Looking back, and we'll dive off into this deeper in the story, I'm sure. What I really noticed was there were a lot of just differences between me and my mom and dad. Were very much into being part of the popular crowd. They were very extroverted. My dad was a super athlete. My mom was athletic and into very cultural things. And all of that was not me. I was a super introvert. I didn't care about having a big group of friends. Because my dad played sports as a kid, he never pushed me towards sports, but I just assumed that's what we did. So I've tried football. I swam for a while. I played several sports. And what I can tell you is I hated it. I did it because I thought that's what we did. And if I figured if I did it long enough, I'd eventually like it. Never liked it. I just tried it, kept trying it, and it just never worked out. So my wife and I met in high school and went off to college together, eventually got married.
Your wife is Pam?
Yep, Pam's my wife. So Pam and I got married and moved to McKinney, which is where we live now. And we've been married now 30 years. So
Ooh, that's awesome.
Yep, we've been married for a long time. And in 2019, we were out on a lunch date. And well, I should back up. Prior to this, we had done Ancestry.com for fun. My parents, the one thing, my dad was an airline pilot. The one thing he never talked about, and my mom would never talk about, was really any family roots past them, their parents, and a few aunts and uncles. But when I'd ask things like, where did we come from? Hey, if you're on a trip in England, can you get our family crest? That was always just kind of blown off and nobody wanted to talk about it. So when Ancestry.com and the DNA test came along, Pam and I have been married for a long time and thought, we've given each other all the Christmas presents we could think of. Here's an easy one that we could do together, and this will be fun. We'll see on a map where I came from. She knew what she expected her results to be. I didn't really know what the results I expected other than I knew who my parents were and went from there. So
was it Ancestry.com or was it 23andMe?
We did Ancestry first, and I've since done 23andMe.
Okay.
So we did the Ancestry test. The year that we did the Ancestry test, like I said, it was for Christmas. Once the results came back, we actually invited Pam's parents and my parents over, threw the maps up on the TV screen, through Chromecast.
Was there any tension?
No. We showed them the map, showed them all the stuff that it did. They were like, wow, that's neat. And they left and never another word. Where a lot of people have these discoveries through a DNA test because they look at their results and go, why is this person showing to be related to me? I didn't care about anything other than knowing geographically kind of where I came from. So I didn't look at matches. I didn't look at anything. I looked at my little map and was like, cool, now I know, and just kind of moved on. Well, fast forward a few years, and Pam had stuck with some genealogy and was enjoying building family trees and things. And this woman had messaged us through Ancestry and said she was trying to figure out how she was related to me. Pam asked me, and I told her, I don't know who this person is. I can't figure it out. She was about the same age as my mom. And I was like, I can't figure out who this could be, but I also only know a couple of aunts and uncles on dad's side, only one uncle on mom's side. So it's completely within the realm of possibility that there could be another aunt or uncle that I just don't know. And Pam asked me what I wanted her to do. And I said, I really don't care. I don't have the time to dig into this. So if you want to talk to this lady, that's cool, but I have no idea who she is. So she and Pam, the lady and Pam, kept talking back and forth for a few weeks. And Pam would ask me things, and, I would say, well, try this, try that, see if this matches up for her. And she never really explained, other than she wanted to figure out why we matched, what her interest or fascination was. So at some point, I finally told Pam, and Pam had known this for a little while, but probably 4 or 5 years before I took the Ancestry test, my dad had told me that he thought my mom was possibly adopted. She still to this day doesn't know. My mom was born back in 1943, so records from back then, there's just not that much out there. And nobody had ever told my mom she was adopted until her mom, my grandma, a few months before she died, just kind of dropped that bomb in her lap that, hey, you're adopted and we've never told you. But grandma was also sick back then, not really lucid, and we're still not 100% sure. Was that grandma just rambling? Was that really something that was true? My mom had no desire to know, so we just dropped it. So I told Pam, I was like, well, maybe maybe my mom actually is adopted, and this lady could be her half sister, her cousin, because I think if I'm remembering right, the woman that contacted us and my mom were maybe at the most a year apart. So it was conceivable that they could be half siblings or something like that. So Pam sent the woman that info, and we didn't hear from her for a little while. Then one afternoon, Pam and I went out for a lunch date when I was off work, and yep, Zinna. It's a Thai food place in Plano on the highway. It's delicious. But we were sitting in a booth having some soup, waiting for the meal to get there, and the familiar Facebook, I can't remember if it was a Facebook or text, but one of the phone tones went off. She picked up her phone and read it for a second and just kind of did this, And I was like, huh, what? And she said, well, it's that lady that's still trying to figure out how y'all are related. And I'm like, okay, well, what does she think now? And she said, well, I'm not sure about this one. I was like, okay, what is it? She said, well, she said that her younger sister had a baby boy in Dallas on your birthday, and she believes you're that baby because it was immediately given up for adoption and thinks nobody ever told you were adopted.
I need to know what is going on through your mind at this moment.
We truthfully, and it's odd as it is to say, completely laughed it off. We were like, we felt bad for her. I said, the one thing I'm sure of is I'm not adopted. So I feel bad for this lady. I still really don't want to, I don't feel like investing.
So you mentioned before, you thought you were different, but you never thought you were adopted.
Right.
Okay.
We talked for a little bit. I was finally told her, I said, just ask her where I was born or where she thinks I was born. We'll get home. I'll get my birth certificate out. I'll look at my birth certificate and I can match that up to what she thinks. And we'll go from there, because while I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, I do feel bad for this lady. And I feel like the least we can do, get her off of us as a track and on to whoever else she's actually looking for, because all she's doing right now is wasting time.
Okay, let me ask you this.
Yep.
There is a group of people out there that think that things lie.
Yes.
And I'm going to play devil's advocate with you. Did you ever for a moment think, if this is true, this is going to be very upsetting to my parents?
No, because at this point, no, because I thought she was wrong. The thought that it's kind of that whole paradigm idea of I'd lived with this as being my parents' kid for this long, that the thought that wasn't right was the furthest thing from my mind.
Okay.
So I had not a concern in the world when this happened, other than, okay, we'll get her on the right track because she's obviously way off base. So
you thought maybe she could be an aunt or something.
Well, I thought that she could be my mom's sister or half sister or an aunt. And she said that she had already done that's why she was contacting Pam again, was she had already done all the research into that and ruled all that out. So now I didn't know what to tell her. And I feel dumb saying this, but it's worth admitting, even when all this was going on, because I was never really into Ancestry other than seeing the map, Pam and I, neither one jumped onto Ancestry to see where this woman popped up in my DNA relations. We never looked at it. So I think she tested in 2019. So we had tested a few years before her. But while all this was going on and she's reaching out, it never occurred to me to look, because I'm like, I just don't know who this lady is. So
did she look like you at all?
I'd never seen her. It was just like an instant message through Ancestry.
Oh, got it.
So I had never seen her, never talked to her, never heard her. So when I told Pam, I was like, just ask her where she thinks I was born. Let's finish our date. And when we get home, I'll get my birth certificate and we'll get this lady back on the right track. So we got home from our date. I went to our little fire safe and started digging out documents. And our kids were younger back then. Pam's parents were at our house watching our kids. So Pam and her mom and dad were sitting in the living room talking about Ancestry and family trees and genealogy, because obviously that was the hot topic on Pam's mind. So they were in there talking about that and working on family tree stuff for them, while I was in another part of the house looking at birth certificates and getting online and doing Google searches and things like that. And when I got my birth certificate out, was the first time that things started seeming off, because I'd had my birth certificate. When this happened, I was 48. So I'd had my birth certificate for a long time. I'd used it to get jobs and all this other stuff. And I just never really looked at it that close. So when I got it out to start looking at it,
If you back up just a sentence or two.
Okay. So we get home, Pam's parents are there, and they started talking about family trees and building family trees. I went to the fire safe and started pulling out documents. And when I started looking at my birth certificate was the first time that I started getting kind of weirded out, because my plan was to get my birth certificate out. If you've ever looked at your birth certificate, at least the Texas one, the top left-hand corner says the county you were born in, the city you were born in, and either the hospital name or the address that you were born if you weren't born in a hospital. So I grabbed my birth certificate. The county said Dallas, city said Dallas, and the location just had a dash in it. So no hospital, no address, no nothing, just a dash. So I thought, well, that's weird, but okay, let me go get Pam's birth certificate, because we were both born in 1970 in Dallas. So I figured I could put Pam's birth certificate next to mine and kind of compare and decide, is there anything weird here? Well, when I got hers out and put it next to mine, they couldn't have been more different. Mine looks like an old copy off a microfiche machine. It's like a black document with white writing on it. Pam's looks like a normal typed out document, just a white piece of paper form with black typing on it. So, but I still thought to myself, well, maybe my parents lost my birth certificate at some point, and that's what a 1970s birth certificate copy looks like.
Right.
So I still wasn't that concerned about it. I was just kind of thrown off, and I was like, well, shoot, now I don't have an answer for what hospital I was born in, but we'll just kind of see where it goes. So I didn't want to go in there and dive into all this with Pam's parents, who didn't know what was going on.
Right.
So I just kind of hung out in another part of the house and started pondering what other stuff could I find to help get this lady back on the right track.
So you're still not thinking?
No, but I'm still not even considering this as an option. So
what is Pam thinking?
I don't know, because she's in with her parents talking about other stuff. I'm by myself. So they're doing their thing, and I start trying to run through other options I could have of helping this lady out, and pretty shortly realized two things that make me feel worse, not better. One, my mom has told every embarrassing story about me I never wanted told. I've gotten all the normal mom guilt trips laid on me when I was a kid, all that stuff. Pam and I have 3 kids together. My parents were there for all 3 of the births. And all of a sudden it hit me that I have never, that I could remember, heard a story about the day I was born, my mom being pregnant with me, anything like that. And I'd also never heard I was in labor with you for this many hours and this is what you do or how you treat me. I never heard any of those stories.
So wait, remind me, forgive me if I missed it. Was your mom still alive at the time?
Yes, she's still alive now, but yeah, she's still with us.
Okay, so did the thought cross your mind to ask her?
That was 100% the one thing that I did not want to do.
And why is that?
Well, my mom and I don't have or have never really had the strongest relationship. We've struggled throughout the years. And I also, still not believing that it was true, couldn't imagine just calling my parents and be like, hey, funny story, did y'all adopt me and not tell me? That was not what I wanted to do.
And you had siblings, correct?
No.
So you were an only child?
Yep. So that was the first thing that came up. The other thing that came up was that when I was born, my dad was in the Navy and flying for an airline. My mom was a stewardess, and they had pictures from all over the world from trips they'd done, whether it was with the Navy or flying commercially. So they took pictures of everything.
So give me some examples so the viewers can see some of the places they've been.
Pictures from Vietnam, Singapore, all over the U.S. They spent a lot of time in Fallon, Nevada, was where my dad did a lot of jet training. So there were pictures from there. If you think about a commercial airline pilot, anywhere you could fly, when he would fly, they'd take pictures.
Got it. So
with all those pictures, I started thinking, okay, I don't remember ever seeing a picture of my mom pregnant or shortly after birth, like Pam and I have of our kids. And I know a lot of people back then may have not had cameras they took pictures with, but I knew my parents did because there were pictures of them all over the place from well before I ever came into the picture. So with those two things, bouncing through my head, I finally wandered out, pulled Pam aside from her parents and said, "Hey, did this lady ever tell you what hospital I was born in?" And she got on her phone and looked and said, she said, "The lady says she can't remember what hospital you were born in. It said that it wasn't really a hospital. It was a small women's clinic off of Colorado Boulevard, I believe, in Dallas." Pam looks at her phone, finds out that the lady can't remember what hospital I was born in, had told her that it wasn't a hospital. It was a little women's clinic somewhere off of Colorado Boulevard in Dallas, and gave us kind of, I can't remember the exact location, but it was right over by my grandparents' house. So that really threw me for my first loop, because as soon as she said that, I knew exactly where it was, because we drove past it every time we went to see my grandparents. And it was a place that a doctor named Dr. Carmichael worked at, because he was a family friend. And every time we would go visit my grandparents, we would stop off and say hi to Dr. Carmichael and just hang out for a few minutes and see him, and then drive the last couple miles to my grandparents' house.
That's where she's claiming you were born.
That's where I thought she was talking about, because she described it. It was a white painted cinder block building with a green awning on it. And that's, to this day, that's what that building looks like. So I thought, well, I'm pretty sure that's it. And how weird is it?
Is that place there?
Yeah.
What if we get a picture of that?
I have one.
Okay.
So that kind of throws me for a loop, because now I know where she's talking about. I've been to the place that she's talking about, and I can't figure out why all this is tying together like this. So
are you starting to think something?
Now I'm still thinking she's wrong, and I'm still focused on trying to figure out that she's wrong and then get her on the right track. So when my in-laws left, I grabbed Pam and I was like, "Okay, so I'm doing worse than I was when we started." And I explained it all to her. I said, "I can't remember any stories of me being born or my mom being pregnant. I can't remember seeing any pictures of my mom pregnant. And I know exactly where this lady's talking about, because I've been there when I was a kid." And she's like, "Do you remember, carried 3 of our kids?" I said, "Did my mom ever talk about being pregnant with you maybe and never with me?" And she's like, "No, she never told me a story." And I was like, "Okay, do you remember seeing any pregnant pictures of her?" "No." Well, crap. So now what do I do now? So we talked for a while, and you asked, and still no, I did not want to call my parents and ask if I was adopted.
Do you look like you are adopted parents? Because I've heard a lot of kids end up still looking like they're adopted parents.
A little bit like my mom, nothing like my dad, which always frustrated me. My dad was a super good looking guy, and I spent my life pissed that I looked nothing like him.
I want to see some.
Will. So I asked Pam, I was like, "Okay, so," and I showed her the birth certificates too. And she was in that same boat of, "Yeah, that's kind of weird. I don't know what to do." So we sat and talked for a while, and she's like, "Oh, a friend of ours that we've known for probably at that point 10 years from our church had known she was adopted her whole life. And right after 9/11, went through all the hoops to unseal her birth records." So Pam said, "Maybe call her, see what the process is." And I had told Pam already, and she knew from being married to me for so long. Didn't want to ask my parents. So what's a way we can do this without making that phone call?
Yeah.
So came up with that. I thought, great. We laid down to go to sleep. She went to sleep. I stared at the ceiling most of the night. And oh my God, what if this is actually right? I don't think it is, but what if?
And if it was right, how are you feeling about that?
At that point, I really didn't know, because I was still so focused on it can't be right. I wasn't letting myself entertain the possibility of.
Sure.
So the next day, I got a hold of our friend and told her my story. And she's like, "Wow, that is really weird. Do you have a copy of your birth certificate?" Because I was at work at this point. And I said, "Yeah, I do. I'll text it to you." She said, "Okay, text it to me. I'm going to hang up. I'm going to go get my birth certificate, and I'll call you back once I've got my birth certificate and I'm looking at yours." I said, "Okay, great." So she called back probably maybe 5 minutes later, and her tone had totally changed. It had gone from the super chatty, "we're friends," to the exact same tone that I had when a doctor called me to tell me that my biopsy had been positive for cancer.
Oh boy, that's a whole nother story.
Yeah. So she went from buddy to, she gets back on the phone. She's like, yeah, so how are you doing? And I'm like, well, not good, because you sound different, and that's not good. And she said, well, let me text you a picture of my birth certificate and then we'll talk. And I said, okay. She texted me a picture of her birth certificate, and I thought she had accidentally texted me mine back, because they're both white typing on black paper. They both look like they came out of a microfiche machine, for anybody that knows what that is. And they looked all the same data was missing. She was born in Texas a couple years before me, not in Dallas, but hers was the same thing.
She was adopted.
Yeah. The actual address of her birth had a dash through it. There was no doctor's signature or name on her birth certificate. And just like mine, I didn't mention this earlier, but she was born, I think, up by Amarillo somewhere. Both her birth certificate and my birth certificate, instead of being stamped in the county that we were born in, Lamb's birth certificate is stamped by the Dallas County Vital Statistics people. Both my adopted friend and my birth certificate are stamped out of Austin. So I got done looking at it, and we talked through how much they looked alike. And she's like, so I did a little research before I called you back, and this is what adopted birth certificates looked like from the 70s in Texas. So I think this lady may be right. I can't say for sure, but all of the signs are now pointing towards that this is right.
And now what are you thinking?
Now, well, I'm still thinking can't be true. So I asked her how she had gotten all of her birth records, because that was my next plan. Was I'll go ahead and see if I can get adoption birth records or ask for them. And if they don't exist, then we know this lady's wrong. And if they do exist, I can cross that bridge at that point. So I asked her about getting her records, and she told me that was the last thing I wanted to do, because unfortunately, here still in Texas, adoptee birth certificates are completely sealed. And if you can prove to the court that you biologically who your parents are and that you're adopted, the judge of the court that granted your adoption can unseal those records, or they can say no.
Now, let me stop you there, because from what I understand, I could be wrong, because I don't want to sway, mothers, but women that have children that need to give them up, and they don't want the children to ever find out. Isn't there a way for them to make sure they never find out?
That's pretty much how Texas is set up right now.
That's what I thought. Okay.
And like I said, to get my records, I had to know who was on my original birth certificate.
Got it.
I had to be able to say who it was and dive off into it that way. So when I talked to my friend and asked her, how did you do this? She said, you don't want to do that. It's a nightmare. And if the judge says no, there's no more recourse. If the judge tells you no, you're done. I was like, okay, so what's my other option? She said, your really only other option is to ask your parents.
What about 23andMe?
Well, I could have done that, but that takes, I think back then it was like 3 months, I think, to get my results. So it takes a long time, and I did not want to sit on my hands for 3 months wondering if this lady was right. So I hung up with my friend and sat there for a little bit, trying to figure out how I'm going to manage this phone call. And
where's your mom and dad living at this point?
They're in Frisco. My goal was to do it in person. It didn't work out so good. So what I finally decided to do was call. So I was working in Plano. I live in McKinney. My parents are in Frisco. Driving from my house to their house is about 15 minutes. Driving from my work to their house is about 5.
Yeah.
So I thought, I'll call. This was evening by now. I thought, I'll call. My dad never keeps his cell phone on at night. It's always turned off and in a drawer. So I'll call his cell phone, leave a message that, hey, I want to get together for lunch or coffee sometime soon, because we hadn't seen each other in a few weeks. And at that point, I will have had time to come up with a way to ask or tell this story and find out if I'm adopted. So I call his phone, and instead of the voicemail picking up, he answers the phone.
Wow.
And I'm just like, oh God, anything but that. Why right now does he answer the phone? It's 7:30 at night. His phone's never on, and he answers the phone. And the other reason I decided to call my dad was, like I said, Mom and I's relationship hasn't always been the best, and she's also the consummate worrier. So I didn't want to get her all spun up. And my dad and I had talked away from my mom enough times that it wasn't weird to call my dad and say, and Mom and Dad were still married. Dad's passed now, but were married back then. So calling him and saying, hey, I want to get together with you, had a couple of questions I wanted to ask you, wasn't a big deal or out of the ordinary for us. So when I called him and he answered the phone, I scrambled in my brain and finally came up with, United for a couple of minutes. And I said, hey, we haven't seen each other in a few weeks. Let's grab coffee or breakfast or lunch one day when I'm at work. And if it's cool, just be you, because there's a couple things I want to ask you about. And I don't want mom to get all worked up. Same thing I've done probably hundreds of times before. And I even added the extra caveat. And I said, before you get worried, nobody's sick, nobody's broke, nobody needs money. The kids are fine. Pam's fine. I'm fine. Just a couple of ideas I want to bounce off of you, and mom gets worked up about stuff, so maybe just you and I could meet. Hundreds of times he has been like, sure, no problem.
He knew this time.
This time he goes, sure, why? And I said, well, not important, not a big deal, not a rush. Next time you're free, let me know and we'll get together. He said, that'd be great, but I still want to know why. And I tell everybody, it felt like we circled that drain for 10 minutes. It was probably like 30 seconds of going back and forth with me explaining, no, let's not do it on the phone, and him saying, I still want to know. And so finally I said, Dad, do you understand I'm not trying to have a phone conversation with you? He goes, I do, but I want to know why we're meeting. And I was like, well, okay. So
what did you say?
And I said, well, okay, Dad, so I'll just go ahead and ask you now. Remember that Pam and I did Ancestry? Let's see. It would have been a few years before that. So we did Ancestry for years before. And he's like, oh, yeah. And I said, well, this lady reached out to us and says that she and I are related. And he goes, oh, well, that's neat. And I said, yeah, and we can't figure out who she is. So you remember you told me that mom might be adopted and you're not sure. And he goes, yeah. I said, well, we thought it, and I was specifically using the word thought, hoping he was listening and paying attention. I was like, we thought it might be mom's cousin, half sibling, or something like that. And he goes, oh, wow, that's fascinating. I didn't know they could do that. And I said, yeah, but it turns out it's not that. And he said, okay, well, what is it? I said, well, she says that her sister had a baby boy. She thinks it's me and that y'all adopted me and never told me.
Oh.
What I was hoping for in this moment was any kind of explosive answer. That lady's crazy. She's a lunatic. Don't talk. I was looking for anything like that. And instead I got, and dead silence. And for me, that was all I needed to hear to know that she was right. So
wow. I just said, wow, that gave me chills. But can I just say one thing?
Sure.
I have a lot of thoughts going through my head right now.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and you said that I could say anything.
Yep.
So this is me talking. In this moment, I should be feeling sorry for you, but I'm feeling sorry for him. And the reason I'm feeling sorry for him, and this is a horrible way to think, because clearly they adopted you and raised you and did all of this, for some reason didn't want you to know that. And now I'm imagining how your dad's feeling. But that's just for a moment, and then I'm sure those feelings are going to shift.
Maybe not. I mean, I still don't know. But
you just wonder, like it's a really, really hard situation.
Yeah.
But I can imagine on your end where you're like, you want to know where you came from. It's maybe not that you're looking to get replacement parents, but maybe you just want to know more about your blood.
Yeah.
Would that really be it?
For the most part, yes. I mean, we'll get deeper into the story later, and there's some new things. But
no, and I only say that because in that moment when you tell him, I just wonder what he was feeling,
Yeah. I'm sure he was sick because he was screwed at this point. I mean,
yeah,
he knows how DNA works.
Yeah.
He didn't know that Ancestry could do this. He knows that the gig's up. And I mean, truthfully, and I can dive into this part now, it's pretty impressive to keep that under wraps for 48 years.
But I think you're going to tell us some reasons why you think they did, right?
I'll tell you a couple. I don't know why. I'll never know why that died with my dad. So he sat there on the phone, really quiet, and I could just hear drumming on something. I later found out whole reason he answered the phone was he had run to the store to get something for my mother, took his cell phone with him in case she remembered something else. And that's why his phone was turned on that night and why he had it. So I hear him drumming on something. And finally I said, Dad, I'm not trying to be a jerk and I'm not trying to make things harder. But until you actually say the words, I'm still going to wonder if I'm understanding all this right. And he let out a long sigh and said, well, Bradley, you're adopted and we've been trying to figure out how to tell you.
For 50 years.
So I'll say at that point, my reaction was pissed. I didn't say anything to him, but my first thing was anger because the lie or the cover up just ended with another cover up, because there's no way in 48 years you didn't ever come across a time where you might have been able to tell me.
Right.
So I'm like, okay. And then I've met a lot of other people that have had there's not a lot of people out that have had adoption DNA surprises. There's tens of thousands of people now that have had surprise your dad isn't your dad things that have happened.
So that happened to one of my friends, and that's a whole other episode. Similar, she always had a feeling, and it turned out to be a happy ending because she did find out that her dad wasn't her biological dad. But what was neat for her, she's yet to meet her dad. He is not someone I think someone wants to meet, but the family, the sisters and all that, turned out to be a great thing. She had a bunch more sisters and brothers she didn't know about.
Cool. Well, and I'll tell you to tell her, and we'll get into this part of my story later. Don't always listen to the bio family about who you want to meet and who you don't want to meet.
Right.
Because if I'd have listened to some of my bio family, I would have a lot of regrets of people I didn't meet.
Got it. Okay. I'll tell her. Because her story is similar to what I think you're about to share. As far as where he has been, and I don't know all of it, but I want to hear. Go ahead.
So he says, yeah, Bradley, you're adopted. We've been trying to figure out how to tell you. And then told me, I think, what everybody that's had this experience has had. Nothing has changed, which is a complete lie. But unless you're on my side of it, not their side of it, it's hard to see how much things have changed.
Okay, so this is a question that I've been thinking about to ask you. So when you find this out, are your parents still your parents?
Yes.
Okay, because I figured that. I mean, that's almost like, and I'm not comparing us to animals, but you raise a puppy from a puppy, it's yours. You raise anything from a baby, it's yours. I would think that you still consider your parents to be your parents.
They 100%. I consider my parents my parents.
Yeah.
Dad is still dad. Mom is still mom.
Okay.
I will tell you, 4 years later, I have such a better understanding of nature versus nurture and how much nature plays in that people don't like to accept when they adopt me. That yes, they 100% are still my parents. I will never call anybody dad but my dad. On the mom side, it's a little bit harder because it's really hard to come up with other names for a mom. But that being what it is, they are still 100% my parents.
Cool. All right. So now what happens?
So I get told nothing has changed. We still love you. Everything's going to be fine. And
Does your mom know at this point?
No, she's at the house. My dad's in the car and he's running to the store and she's at the house. So he ends with, I guess I need to go home and tell your mom that you know, and maybe we can meet this weekend when you're off work. And I said, okay, sounds good. We told each other we loved each other. And then he hung up and I had to figure out, I've not said, I'm a cop. I was at work as a cop that night and I had 6 more hours of a shift to get through.
Were you crying?
Oh, yeah. And this is on.
Were you crying? Did you feel betrayed? Did you feel alone? How did you feel?
Yes to all of that. So the only word I have ever been able to come up with to describe it the way I want to describe it is unmoored. It reminds me of seeing those seeing footage after like a hurricane comes through.
Keep going.
So unmoored is my word for it. And I always think of seeing footage after a hurricane. It's kind of like being a ship that's now sitting up in a field somewhere. I just felt like I was somewhere I 100% didn't belong anymore. The physical feeling of it when he told me, yes, I was adopted, was a lot like the amusement park ride where they put you against the wall and they spin you really fast and then drop the floor out from under you. That's exactly what that felt like, is everything started spinning and the floor fell out from under me.
So is it because you had preferred, since you were adopted, to have known your whole life, and that would have been a different story than finding out 50 years later?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
It wasn't, you weren't crying because they adopted you.
No.
You're crying because you just would have liked to have known.
Well, and not even so much that. Well, I mean, yes, that was part of it, but just the fact that suddenly I didn't genetically or biologically know who I was anymore. I had spent 48 years believing something about me that turned out not to be true. And now I had to figure out how to integrate all of that back in.
Are you talking about like health situations and ways you think about things and depression, anxiety, like thinking about, oh, alcoholism's in my family, so I better not take a drink, or that kind of thing?
I mean, that's some of it. I mean, this is a good part to throw this part in the story just from that question. So I had cancer. I had thyroid cancer when I was 38 years old.
Oh.
I still vividly remember being in the pre-op room with Pam, my mom, and my dad, and my mom saying, "This is just so weird. Cancer doesn't run in our family." And she's right. It doesn't. It runs rampant in my biological family.
That is interesting that she would say that, because that's an actual medical thing that they probably would like to have known.
And I'm fine. I'm cancer-free now for 12, 15 years. I'm fine. But
oh, that's awesome.
But so, yeah, there's so much that it's really hard to describe to people that haven't had it happen. Everything that you know about yourself suddenly isn't quite right. Everything I experienced, they were all experiences. They were all true. They all happened. But they're all now tinted with a lie / cover up / whatever you want to call it, of there was always something going on in the background that I was not aware of. So
have you had the conversation with your parents? Why didn't you just tell me?
Sort of. We'll get to that here in a minute.
Okay.
So
we're definitely going to have to do this in several episodes, because this story is so fascinating, and I know we haven't even gotten into the meat and potatoes of it.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna collapse from the steps.
So we hang up. I get myself composed. I'm working at a bar. This is St. Patrick's Day night, and I'm working in a bar district as a cop. So I go walk around for a little while, do my best to meander through my shift. I think I made it through about 4 more hours before I realized this just wasn't even safe anymore, because the one place my mind was at work.
Are you still a policeman?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I decided
we can do a whole episode on that.
Yeah.
Cop stories. My husband's favorite show is Cops.
Yeah. So I made it about 4 hours and decided I'm going to go home. I can't keep doing this. I just can't. So, well, and before that, I should back up. Probably the worst way in the world to tell Pam, but I just couldn't. I was trying to stay at work and knew that if I got on the phone with her, I was going to break down and not be able to get back from it.
So she didn't know yet?
No, I was at work. She's at home. And I finally, after I got myself together, texted her and said, I know texting you isn't the best way to do this, but I can't talk on the phone about it right now. If you want to tell this lady, it turns out she's right. My dad just told me I was adopted, and I'll talk to you when I get home from work tonight.
Wow.
And she messaged back, and I told her to tell the woman that had contacted us, my aunt now, it turned out, to tell my aunt that it wasn't that I was upset with her and wasn't going to talk to her, but I wasn't ready to talk to her yet because I had a lot of garbage I had to work through in my own head before I could even begin to do that. But since she and Pam had talked for so long, I told Pam, if you want to keep talking to her and let her tell you things, go ahead, because you're the safest place for me to hear anything from at this point.
So at this point, are you thinking, all right, well, where is my bio mom and dad? Or are you not even going there yet?
I wasn't even there yet.
Yeah.
So I told Pam, hey, talk to her, find out what you can, and then I can ask you questions. And if you don't know, you can find out for me, or you can dole me out little bits of information when I feel ready and we can talk about it. So she says, great. By the time I got home from work, it was like 1 o'clock in the morning. She was already asleep. I spent night 2 staring at the ceiling and not fresh, but started the next day when the sun came up again.
Yeah. So from what I understand, majority of people that adopt, when a child becomes like 4, 5, 6, they say, I'm your mommy and this is your daddy. But you weren't actually in my tummy. And you know, 2 other people actually made you, but we are your mommy. So they kind of have that right then. And so start it young and the child just gets used to it. And I think most children do just fine with it.
You would be surprised how many struggle with it.
Really? Okay, so that brings me to another question. And again, I'm playing devil's advocate, and I know these are hard questions. Could your mom and dad have been trying to protect you? knowing that it would end up hurting you in the end.
I think that was a partial goal of theirs. I think my mother's main goal was to protect herself.
And is that because she thought you wouldn't respect her the same? That she didn't carry you? Was your mother unable to have children? Was that?
I am still unclear on why they couldn't have kids, but I can also tell you my mom is very insecure from some other things that have happened with some adopted friends of one of my daughters. She is very insecure feeling about being an adoptive mother and not a mom.
And I can see that, and I could understand that if I was unable to have children. I know there's a lot of women that causes horrible mental anguish,
Mm-hmm.
and I think they call it barren, not being able to have children. And I could see how they would have a fear that maybe they weren't good enough to have actually had you, that they did something wrong, or what, I don't know your mother at all. I'm just playing devil's advocate, trying to put myself in her position. Where she adopts this beautiful baby boy and devotes her whole life to him, and then wonders, like, maybe she was thinking, would he still love me the same if he knew that I didn't carry him? I don't know. I mean, I just wonder if those were thoughts that went through her mind.
I think that was a lot of her struggle, was those insecure kind of thoughts.
Yeah.
I will tell you my adoptee 100% unpopular answer with adoptive parents is, if you're not comfortable telling your kid that they're adopted, you're probably not a good choice to adopt a kid.
So as an adopted, so as somebody that didn't know they were adopted and found out later that they were adopted, you're saying you feel like for you personally, life would have been much better for you had you just known from age 4 or 5 that you were adopted.
I won't say better, because the adoptees that I know that have always known struggle with a whole other set of things from childhood on.
So devil's advocate again, then what do we do? Because there are a lot of parents that certainly shouldn't be parents that have children.
You 100% tell your kid the truth about where they came from. That your child has a right to know where they came from, regardless of how that makes you feel. That's not your decision.
But what about people that get pregnant on accident and choose to have the baby but want to give it up for adoption? Are you saying that you should just keep the baby?
No, they don't. They could totally give the baby up. I don't think that they have any right to anonymity. They chose to make a baby. Now, short of, sexual assaults and things like that, the majority of people that give up babies for adoption chose to conduct themselves in such a way where they got pregnant. At that point, the child has rights to know where they came from, period.
Understood. And so you're pro adoption, just not pro keeping it a secret.
Correct.
Okay.
I am fine with adoption. I think how we do adoption is garbage, but I don't know the answer to fix it. So I stay away from that pretty much.
I have a question I want to ask you. I remember watching a show when I was very young. It was one of those made for TV movies back in the day. And it was so sad. It was about a couple that had adopted a baby. And her biological mother was like a drug addict and came from violence and all of this. And this couple was crazy about the baby. And at that time, and I don't know if the rules are still the same, I think they gave the bio parents like a good 4 years to come back. And she did come back. And it was, you have to watch it, but it was heartbreaking because the little 4-year-old was holding on to her mother as she knew her mother. And here's this woman that actually had her, taking her away. I think those rules are a little interesting.
Adoption in general is a mess.
Yeah.
The secrecy money people make on it is a mess. I have a good friend that's adopted kids, and every one of them has cost her $15,000 plus.
Wow.
There's a myth in America that there are all these babies waiting to be adopted. There are way more people that want to pay and adopt babies than babies out there. That's why people.
And I always wondered that, because I know friends myself that are like on the waiting list for years to get a baby. Yes. And I've never understood why that is.
Yeah. I mean, realistically, if you look around, there's a handful of foster homes still. There's not a bunch of orphanages in the United States of babies that are just sitting there waiting to be adopted. It doesn't happen.
That's so interesting. Yeah. Thank you so much